Welcome to our deep dive, and today we are going to be looking into synesthesia. It's a pretty fascinating topic, where like your senses, they all kind of get blended together.
You're right.
It's like tasting shapes or seeing sounds.
Uh,
Pretty wild stuff. We've got a bunch of great research to go through today.
yeah.
So we're going to be exploring like how real this phenomenon is and all that good stuff.
It's interesting because for so long, it was really dismissed like as just fantasy or like a really vivid imagination.
Right.
But there's so much evidence now that it's a real thing, like a real perceptual experience.
Yeah.
And it's amazing like the variety of ways it manifests.
So it's not just about seeing sounds.
No, not at all. I mean, sound to color synesthesia is pretty common, like music triggers color visualizations and stuff.
Right.
But there are lots of other forms.
Oh,
So like some people, they experience grapheme color synesthesia,
mhm.
which is where like letters or numbers, they evoke certain colors.
I've heard some pretty wild descriptions from people who have grapheme color synesthesia.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, how do you even read if all the letters are just like exploding with color?
Right. Yeah.
Like imagine you're trying to read a book and every letter has its own specific color.
Yeah, it'd be hard to focus.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. You've got like taste shape synesthesia too.
Mm.
And that's where flavors are linked to specific shapes.
Right.
I interviewed someone once who had that, and they were describing the taste of chocolate as like a smooth, round sphere.
Wow.
But coffee was like this jagged, sharp triangle to them.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It seems like their senses are all mixed up,
Yeah.
but in a way that makes sense to them.
Right.
What I'm really curious about is like, how do we know this isn't just their imagination?
Yeah.
Like, what's the scientific evidence that synesthesia is a real thing?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. One of the big things is that like their experiences are really consistent over time.
So if you ask someone with synesthesia, like, okay, what color do you see when you hear this note or when you read this letter?
Right.
And you ask them again, like months later, even years later, they're probably going to give you the same answer.
Oh, wow.
If it was just their imagination, you would think that it would change up right.
That makes sense. Yeah, if it was just random, you'd expect like some variation.
Yeah, totally.
So is there like more concrete evidence? Like, is there something different physically about the brains of people with synesthesia?
Yeah, there is. So they've done brain imaging studies
Okay.
using fMRI and PT scans. And they've found some pretty interesting differences in brain activity between synesthetes and non-synesthetes.
Okay.
Like, for example, when people with sound color synesthesia listen to words,
Yeah.
the areas of their brain associated with visual processing, they light up,
Wow.
even though they're not actually seeing any colors.
So their brain is like literally processing the sound as visual input.
Yeah.
That's pretty convincing.
So what are some of the theories out there about like what's actually going on in the brain?
So one of the main theories is that there's this cross-activation between brain regions. So like normally those regions would be separate,
Okay.
but with synesthesia, it's like the walls between them have extra doors.
Right.
And so information is kind of leaking through.
Interesting. So is it like the wiring in their brains is different?
Yeah, that's what some scientists think. That maybe there are more connections or less inhibition between certain brain regions.
Okay.
And that's leading to this unusual sensory blending.
Okay.
So if we look at grapheme color synesthesia as an example,
Yeah.
there's this part of the brain called the fusiform gyrus.
Hmm.
And it's involved in recognizing letters, but also processing color information.
Okay, so you're saying in people with grapheme color synesthesia,
Yeah.
these two functions are like getting mixed up in the fusiform gyrus.
Right.
Like, how would that happen?
Well, so think of the fusiform gyrus as the central hub
Okay.
for letters and colors.
Okay.
In synesthetes, it's like there's a short circuit in the wiring. So
Right.
when their brain tries to process a letter,
Yeah.
it accidentally triggers the color processing pathways as well.
Yeah.
And that's leading to them experiencing the color associated with the letter.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how like one little difference in brain wiring
Right.
can lead to such a huge change in perception.
Exactly.
I'm curious about attention though.
Yeah.
Like, does a synesthete have to be like consciously focusing on something to experience the synesthetic effect?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one that researchers have been debating for a while.
Hmm.
So some studies suggest that, yeah, like you need conscious awareness of whatever the trigger is.
Okay.
Like, for example, in some experiments, synesthetes only said that they saw the color after they recognized the letter.
So it's like their brain has to process the letter first before the color pops up.
Right.
But I thought some studies show synesthesia happening even without conscious awareness.
Yeah, right. There are studies that challenge that idea.
Okay.
So researchers have found that synesthetes might be faster to respond to a color that matches their synesthetic association for a letter,
Mm.
even if the letter flashes by too quickly for them to actually see it consciously.
Okay.
So it's like their brain's processing the letter and the color simultaneously, even though they're not even aware of it.
So how do we make sense of these totally opposite findings? Is synesthesia conscious or subconscious?
Well, it's likely both, both bottom-up and top-down processes are at play.
Okay.
So imagine bottom-up is the raw sensory information coming in,
Right.
and top-down is your brain's interpretation based on what you know and what you expect.
Okay.
And the amount that each of those contributes probably depends on the type of synesthesia, and even the specific task.
So it's not like an on-off switch.
Right.
It's more like this complex thing of sensory input, neural wiring, and cognitive processing
Yeah.
all working together.
Exactly. It's a lot of complex brain things. It's rarely a simple yes or no.
Right.
There's usually a whole spectrum of possibilities.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So where does the research go from here? How do we figure all this out?
Well, one exciting thing is using brain imaging, like fMRI,
Okay.
to actually look at the brain activity in synesthetes while they're doing things that involve different levels of attention.
So you could see which brain regions light up when they're consciously aware of something versus when they're not.
Exactly. And by comparing those patterns, we might be able to figure out what the specific mechanisms are that are at work.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's not just brain scans. We need to learn from the synesthetes themselves,
Of
too.
course, yeah. Their firsthand accounts are really important.
Right. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
The science helps us understand their experiences,
Yeah.
but their experiences also help guide the science.
Right.
That collaboration is really key.
So what are the bigger implications of all this? Does synesthesia change how we think about perception and reality?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it really makes you question the very nature of perception and consciousness even,
Wow.
and reality itself.
Hmm.
For example, how do we know for sure that how we see reality is accurate if someone else can experience the same things in such a different way?
Right.
It really challenges the idea that sensory experience is objective.
So what I perceive as red might not be what you perceive as red.
It's possible. It really highlights this concept called qualia, which are these subjective, qualitative experiences of consciousness.
Okay.
And synesthesia shows just how unique those experiences can be.
Yeah, it's almost like we're all living in our own little sensory worlds.
All right.
Yeah. Makes you think what else is out there that we're not even aware of?
Exactly. Synesthesia reminds us that there's always more to learn.
Yeah.
And that how we understand reality is always changing. But maybe we should bring it back down to earth for a bit.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
And talk about some of the practical implications of synesthesia research.
Especially considering, how much people with synesthesia have been misunderstood and even mistreated in the past.
Right. Yeah, it's important to be really careful that the research doesn't cause any harm. We don't want to be treating it like a disorder that needs to be cured.
Oh, absolutely not. Synesthesia is a totally natural variation of human experience. And the research needs to be done with sensitivity and respect.
Absolutely.
And we need to make sure that people with synesthesia are fully informed about the research and that their privacy is protected.
I totally agree. Creating a safe environment for them to participate in research is so important.
Yeah.
Their voices and perspectives really need to be heard.
This research has the potential to not only help people with synesthesia, but society as a whole, right? If we can figure out how they learn and process information, we could come up with better teaching methods that work better for everyone.
Exactly. And imagine if we could understand how they experience creativity.
Right.
We might be able to unlock that same potential in others.
So synesthesia research is about way more than just understanding a rare phenomenon.
Right.
It's about understanding what the human mind is capable of.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Synesthesia is like this amazing example of how extraordinary the brain is. And it just shows us how much we still have to learn.
We've covered a lot today, but I'm curious.
Yeah.
With everything we've talked about,
Yeah.
do you think it's possible that we all have some synesthetic potential, even if we don't know it?
It's possible. Yeah, maybe the boundaries between our senses aren't as rigid as we think.
So you're saying there's a chance we all have like a little synesthete inside us.
It could be, the brain is super adaptable, right? It's
Oh,
constantly rewiring itself based on what we experience. And there's some evidence that even people without synesthesia still experience some sensory interplay.
okay.
Like, think about metaphors. We use them all the time to connect things that seem totally unrelated,
Right.
like a loud shirt or a bitter taste of defeat.
Right, you're right. Those metaphors are kind of like creating a synesthetic link between different senses.
Exactly. And some researchers think that those metaphorical associations could actually reflect real underlying neural connections
Okay.
that are there in all of us, even if they're not as strong as they are in synesthetes. So maybe with the right kind of training or stimulation, we could actually strengthen those connections and tap into some synesthetic perception.
That's a really cool idea. What if we go like train our brains to see music or taste shapes?
Right. It sounds like science fiction.
Yeah.
But there have been some studies that show that even non-synesthetes can have like temporary synesthetic experiences through certain types of training or even with psychedelic drugs.
Wow. So maybe we all have the potential. We just need to figure out how to unlock it.
Maybe so.
What would you recommend for people who want to learn more about synesthesia or even think they might have it themselves?
Well, first of all, embrace your curiosity.
Yeah.
There's so much information out there online in books. There are even museums dedicated to sensory perception.
And there are those online tests too, right?
Right. You can take those to see if your experiences match up with the common types of synesthesia.
Okay, cool.
And there are research groups and organizations that are specifically focused on studying and supporting synesthetes.
Okay.
And they offer a lot of great information, resources, and opportunities to connect with other people who have similar experiences.
It sounds like a good way to find a community of people who really get it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to remember that synesthesia isn't a disorder.
Right.
It's not something that needs to be fixed.
Right.
It's a unique neurological trait that can actually enrich your perception, your creativity, even your well-being.
Honestly, after learning about it today, I kind of wish I had synesthesia.
I know, me too. It would be amazing to experience the world with that extra layer of sensory richness.
Right.
But even if we don't have it ourselves, we can still appreciate the wonder and diversity that it brings to human experience.
Absolutely. So the next time you're listening to music or reading a book, take a minute to think about how your senses might be connected in ways you haven't even realized.
Yeah,
Maybe there's a little bit of synesthesia hiding in your own perception,
that's a great point.
just waiting to be discovered.
Maybe one day we'll all be able to tap into that amazing sensory potential that synesthesia shows us.
That would be incredible. Thanks for taking us on this journey into the world of synesthesia.
It's been my pleasure. It's a question that's fascinated people for a long time, like scientists, philosophers. Could it be that the boundaries between our senses are more fluid than we think?
Like maybe there are all these like hidden pathways just waiting to be activated.
Yeah, maybe like under the surface of our normal everyday perceptions, there's
Wow.
all this stuff going on that we're not even aware of.
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah, and the brain is incredibly adaptable, right? Like it's constantly changing and rewiring itself based on our experiences. And there is some evidence that even people who don't have synesthesia experience at least a little bit of this sensory interplay.
Okay, so like how...
Well, think about metaphors.
Okay.
We use them all the time to connect things that don't seem to go together at all, like a loud shirt,
Right.
a bitter taste of defeat.
You're right. You're right. It's like those metaphors are creating a synesthetic link between our senses.
Exactly. And some researchers think that those metaphorical associations could actually be showing us that these neural connections are there in everyone.
Okay.
They're just not as strong as they are in people with synesthesia. So maybe with the right training or stimulation, we could make those connections stronger and experience more synesthetic perception.
So like we could train our brains to see music or taste shapes.
It does sound kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, like something out of a movie.
But there have actually been some studies that showed that even people without synesthesia can start to have temporary synesthetic experiences through certain types of training or even exposure to psychedelic drugs.
That's wild. So what would you say to our listeners who want to learn more about synesthesia or maybe think they might have it themselves?
I think the most important thing is to just be curious.
Right?
Explore it. There's tons of information online and in books.
Yeah.
There are even museums dedicated to sensory perception.
That's so cool. And there are those online tests too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Those are a great way to see if your experiences match up with the common types of synesthesia.
And if someone thinks they might have synesthesia, are there resources for them?
Yeah, definitely. There are research groups and organizations specifically focused on studying and supporting synesthetes,
Okay.
and they provide a lot of great information and resources and even opportunities to connect with other synesthetes.
It sounds like a great way to find a community and people who understand what you're going through.
Exactly. And I think it's important to emphasize that synesthesia isn't a bad thing. It's not a disorder. It's not something that needs to be cured. It's just a different way of experiencing the world.
Exactly.
And it can actually be a really positive thing.
After learning about it today, I have to admit I'm a little jealous.
Me too. It would be incredible to experience the world with that extra layer of sensory information.
Right.
But even if we don't have it ourselves, we can still appreciate the wonder and diversity that it brings to human experience.
Absolutely.
Oh.
So the next time you're listening to your favorite song or reading a book, really pay attention to your senses.
Yeah.
See if you notice any unexpected connections or associations.
You might surprise yourself.
Maybe you have a little bit of synesthesia in you that you've never noticed before.
That's a great takeaway. And who knows, maybe one day we'll all be able to experience the world the way synesthetes do.
That would be pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been an incredible journey into the world of synesthesia. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the human mind.